It's a great pleasure to be speaking to Robert Amsterdam today. Robert, welcome to Nairobi.
Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Robert, just obviously I've followed what you're doing, but to others, they might not know, they might have seen you in the context of Bobi wine, but tell us a little bit about what is a global legal practice. You've had some tremendous, you've represented some really iconic and interesting cases. I was looking through it. Do you want to just describe a little bit to us what Robert Amsterdam and Partners does?
Sure. We do litigation largely in what we would call emerging markets. We've been doing it for 40 years. I have a history in Africa. Came here as a boy, was at Legon in Ghana, thrown out by General Acheampong.
Wow.
During the coup. That was my first expulsion. I've since been made PNG 6 times, most recently in Uganda.
Are you allowed to go there at the moment?
No, I've been banned from Uganda. My friend President Sata banned me from Zambia when I was
banned from there as well.
When I was representing Rupiah Banda.
Yes.
President banned His Excellency, an incredibly wonderful African gentleman. We represented the Thai red shirts.
Yes, I saw. You even made a speech I saw in Bangkok.
Many speeches. We were there during the Bangkok uprising.
Wow.
Many of our friends were killed. Horrific. Tried to take the army to the ICC, came very close. Educated the Thai people that their Prime Minister, Abhisit at the time, was not only a war criminal for murdering these innocent civilians, but that he was British.
That's right.
None of them knew he was British. You know, we litigate matters of commercial import and matters of political import in Asia, in Africa, and in Central and Latin America. Today we're representing an important business in Honduras, wrongly accused of being involved in the murder of a human rights figure in Central America. Heavily involved in Venezuela for decades.
At the moment as well?
At the moment, not. We represented Eligio Cedeno, the leading banker in the country, and helped free him from the hands of Chavez. Horrific time he spent in jail. So we've basically focused on working with business to protect their assets and their individuals. And what we've noticed in the last 20 years, and I think one of the kickoffs to this was our Khodorkovsky case
That
in
was
Russia.
what I was going to ask you about,
Yeah.
because that's such an iconic case in the history of the Putin dispensation.
Well, in fact, you know, I think we were really the first to, I challenged Gerhard Schroeder in the bowels of the Bundestag in 2004 and condemned him for calling Putin, as he did at that time, a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat.
Yes.
And
but Schroeder's always been close to Putin, I
well,
think.
in fact, Schroeder is part of an elite group of former leaders who have been co-opted by Putin. But unfortunately, in our work in Russia, we again ended up arrested in Russia. And,
you were?
Yes, and was deported, and unfortunately 2 of my good friends who had been involved in that case were murdered. The Russians don't take hostages. The kleptocracy that's taken over Russia is extraordinarily dangerous. They're coming into Africa in a big way.
You saw that, did you? CAR, I
Yes.
saw they were in Somalia, Lavrov was in Somalia, he's been in Burundi.
And in fact, the plan, as I spoke about years ago, the plan for the Russians all along was to get into Africa, not only to challenge the Chinese role, but to establish themselves and project power in a way that capitalized on some of their old contacts from Soviet days. Very few of us know the level of power they even today wield in South Africa, for instance.
Really?
With all of the power and atomic power they're selling into the country.
Nuclear deal
Absolutely.
They were trying, which is felled nene, in effect,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah, so there's a lot of my past, whether it's in Africa or in Russia, that's all come around again in terms of what's happening here.
It's interesting. Life is very circular. But you seem to be, I mean, you describe yourself as being PNG in 6 countries, being deported from Russia. You're operating at the bleeding edge, aren't you, here, Robert?
Well, you know,
I can't imagine other lawyers finding themselves in a similar... What defines your legal practice and your thinking?
Look, let me be very clear. I have tremendous respect for my colleagues in the profession, but very often they are burdened with the baggage of having an office in a particular location or having political connections. So their ability to operate in a particular country is limited. The amplitude of what they can do is limited. We have a small firm. We have an unlimited amplitude of what we can do against governments who engage in unlawful behavior. And as I think people witnessed in terms of our representation of Bobi Wine,
yes,
we are prepared to go to the mats for our clients in a way that, you know, I think many lawyers would hesitate, because for all of us in the legal business, it's a business, and you have to always have your mind on your next client, particularly if you have a large operation. We've kept our operation very small, very focused on doing intellectually challenging and politically important cases. We have a very large pro bono practice, which we frankly fund by the fact that we are commercial lawyers. And what we've done is we've managed to bleed one into the other by demonstrating to our corporate clients that our knowledge of issues like human rights works to their advantage when it comes to bilateral investment treaty disputes, and also when it comes to our willingness to lobby hard and aggressively with supranational bodies, whether it's ECOWAS, whether it's COMISA, whether it's the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. Because one of the things corporates now are starting to realize is that expropriatory governments now have in their toolbox jail. And Mr. Putin didn't begin it, but he's really brought to light the willingness and ability of countries to criminalize their political opponents and now their economic opponents. And of course, we've seen this in China with Xi Jinping.
Yes, well, just touch on that, because that's become a big issue on the continent. My impression, it was, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is that certainly Trump is winning under his definition of this trade war. I thought Xi Jinping had sort of stuck himself on a pedestal with his president for life, and looks to me a little bit more brittle. But if you look at what's happening, for example, in Xinjiang, this digital panopticon they've got going in China, where they seem to be surveilling everybody. What's your read of this?
My read is that China is much more fragile than it's being presented. We're hosting 3 events on China over the next 2 weeks.
I got an invitation to one, thank you for that.
With Gilbert and Tobin from Australia. And our view is that we need to be realistic about China and understand both its strengths and its weaknesses. China has done a tremendous amount of good works in Africa. At the same time, there's no question, they've inhibited the growth of representative democracy in some countries. They've given some autocrats a new lease on life. They've reduced the rule of law in countries like Zambia. So you need a 360-degree view of China in Africa, or the Belt and Road concept. And the fact is, the Belt and Road concept, which is a $1 trillion Chinese investment, is, I mean, to be very frank, it has the dangerous trappings of neocolonialism. I mean, in the sense that really the Chinese have stopped exporting as their first goal, and now what they're doing is they're using their surpluses to, if you will, colonize the rest of the world with Belt and Road. And the death trap is very real.
Very real.
And Sri Lanka has just had...
Hambantota.
Yes, I mean, you know...
Zambia, they're saying, has lost its control of its broadcasting.
Well, a lot of the stories that come out of Zambia are not necessarily true, but the Chinese certainly have a lot of leverage. And of course, what's caught everyone's eye is Pakistan now saying enough.
And going to the IMF.
Going to the IMF. I mean, this is a huge, I mean, two things have happened in the last week that I think are completely shocking if you're China. One is Pakistan going to the IMF. And the second was the Pence speech.
Yes, did you? I listened to that speech.
Yes, I mean...
Do you think that speech represented the thinking of the administration, or is Pence an outlier?
Absolutely not. Firstly, Pence isn't that bright. Yes. So believe me, he didn't write the speech. Secondly, he's from Indiana and he barely knows where China is. Foreign policy is not his strength. Thirdly, let's be fair to the Chinese. I don't believe they're in any way attempting to interfere in the election.
But I thought that was a great plot twist by Trump.
It's a great plot twist. Pretty soon we're going to see Canada. Justin Trudeau is somehow involved in the election. But certainly, in respect to the technology theft, in respect to the 9-dash line, in respect to many of these things, the U.S. has a lot of points to make. And China, watching the triumph of Trump on NAFTA, and I think we all, whatever you think about Trump, we all have to give him some credit.
Did he renegotiate those agreements?
Yes, he did.
Did he move the dial? Or, you know, because I remember when it first came out, everyone said it's just change of name. Just change the name.
He moved the dial.
He moved the dial. And
he is bringing jobs, high-paying jobs, back to the U.S. And most importantly, and you know, I've done this type of work before, in the actual bearings of the deal, in other words, in the substrata of the deal, when you look at the definition of goods, he's making inputs far less China dependent. So for the Mexicans to have an input that works, they've got to reduce their incorporated Chinese inputs. Very sophisticated way to shtup the Chinese.
Yes. Who's the brains? The
Leitziger.
Yes. Okay.
So he's got a very technocratic staff who have been focused on China for years, who had an axe to grind, Navarro and Leitziger, before they went in, and they've given it a lot of thought. And you know, in a way, hats off. I mean, it's not revolutionary, but it is evolutionary, and it's important.
And do you feel that it's going to continue to ratchet higher, or how do you read that situation? Well,
firstly, it's going to ratchet higher until after the midterms. That's for sure. Everything will change after the midterms. Trump has to see how badly he's hurt in key GOP territory by going against free trade the way he has. But it is resonating with a lot of American folks that China is a problem we have to deal with. Now, the part that's not being told to them is that China is the largest holder of American treasuries.
That's right.
So it isn't like China is without an ability to respond, except then you get into the issue of mutually assured destruction.
That's right. And I think they haven't been adding to it, but they've remained pretty static for now.
Yes.
But that's right. You're completely correct. That's the one bit of leverage. But you, as you said, it's a nuclear option.
It is.
Blow that up. You're going to.
I don't know what the markets have done today, but they've been crashing in the last.
So the 10-year yield has been going much higher. If you look at the charts, it had been in a cyclical run for decades, coming low, and we've broken out of that. But I think that's also a function of the very pro-cyclical stimulus that Trump threw into the mix.
Yes.
So this is very interesting. So China, Putin, Trump, this is the troika that one looks at the world through. Who's being more effective in your mind? Is it Trump at the moment?
Well,
and
look,
we're all sort of sitting far away and thinking he's a buffoon, but from what you're telling me, he's really smart.
I think that that when anyone reaches the presidency of the United States, calling him a buffoon is just overly simplistic.
That's right.
I think Putin has done, and this is a man who tried to jail me, murder my friends, but he's done a tremendous amount with very little.
Yes.
If you look
they
at,
say the size of the economy is the size of Italy's.
yes,
But
I mean,
if you look at power projection,
it's incredible.
It's incredible.
And he was completely offside 3 years ago.
Yes.
They were talking about building a Praetorian Guard. He was very unsteady, and his move in Syria has made him a player in the Mideast. He has capitalized from the vacuum of American power. More than Xi Jinping has capitalized. He has capitalized. How long that will last, I don't know. The pivot to Asia, I would...
This is Obama's pivot.
Obama's
Yes.
pivot to Asia, has to some extent not yet reached its stride.
But you're seeing a more aggressive U.S. in terms of FONOPs and in terms of operations.
Absolutely. And the other sad thing you're seeing is Myanmar, which under Obama, the United States was making some real inroads with the Rohingya genocide and now the sanctions.
Is it not? I mean, it's
No,
shocking.
I mean, look, it's horrific.
Yes.
But China is making a huge meal out of Myanmar now. Myanmar will soon be called China's California.
Yes.
And they will be using that port and really in some ways integrating not only Myanmar, but attempting to integrate Southeast Asia into a greater sphere. I don't want to call it a co-prosperity sphere, but a greater sphere. And I think it's something, if the Americans are trying to talk about who's projecting power where, the Americans' willingness to sanction human rights abuses, which we can all applaud, needs to be leavened with the idea that we're handing over countries to China at pivotal moments. And I think the United States needs to rethink and recalibrate its sanctions policy. Because if it doesn't, in 10 years, the United States will not have a reserve currency anymore.
That's a big, bold claim. I mean, I think about that a lot, and I recall many people have tried to replace the dollar. Gaddafi was one. Saddam Hussein was another.
Well, I'll regularly tell my clients to not put their deals in dollars.
Is that right? Because you're going through the U.S. system.
You don't want to go near the U.S. system. If you can avoid it from a legal litigation risk perspective and an FCPA perspective, you do not want to ever denominate in dollars.
Do you think this special purpose vehicle of the European Union, the High Representative Federica Mogherini, she's created this vehicle to avoid sanctions, Iranians, is it going to work? Does it legally stack up? Is it,
Look, it's too early to tell. I think that with that, we're seeing a breakdown of an international consensus on sanctions. And Trump's move with Iran is fascinating because I continue to argue the United States has misused the sanctions weapon.
Yes.
And, fighting with the Europeans over Iran is foolishness. And yet, you know, there is no argument that Iran has used the Obama deal to take the dividends from the settlement, if you will, and put it into further destabilizing the region. Trump is right. You just have to look at the horror show that is Yemen to understand that.
Do you blame the Iranians for Yemen, or?
Listen, I think there's enough blame with the Saudis to go around, but you have a proxy war now. Yes. And whatever you want to say about the Iranians in Yemen, you also have the Iranians in Syria in a massive show of force. You have the Iranians in Lebanon. They have made massive moves since the deal. And the U.S. is not wrong to be highlighting that and to be saying that they misspent their peace dividend. And it's gotten, look, it's gotten a lot of attention within Iran. The Iranians are having a tremendously difficult time domestically now.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the currency's been in free fall.
Yes.
But, you know, if you look back at Iranian history, when the regime comes under tremendous pressure, it does tend to rally behind its leadership.
Absolutely, but there is a fatigue factor setting in, and there were a lot of expectations raised about the deal. And as we all know from studying revolutions, a moment where raised expectations are not met is often an inflection point.
Let me now bring you back to the continent. In particular, you know, you've got a lot of airtime because you've been defending Bobi Wine. Bobi Wine is the musician turned politician, and if you go by the crowds that seem to follow him around, I mean, he is literally a very, very serious challenge to President Museveni, who I think is the second longest serving African president after
Paul Biya.
Paul Biya. Tell us what brought you in there, what was the motivation, and how you're reading that situation.
Well, I mean, to be frank with you, we got a call from a human rights NGO that said this man is being tortured.
So it was you only got involved at that point?
That was it. That we had not, prior to that, been involved heavily in Uganda. We were immediately activated because when someone's being tortured, if you're going to take the case, you have to move immediately. So we sent Simon Wolf to Kampala, which I thought was quite heroic of Simon.
Yes. At that point in
time, and he, you know, aggressively spoke out, and then we began sort of an aggressive mixture of both media and let's just call them political discussions.
Yes.
And as a result of that, and a terrific team of local counsel in Uganda, and an inflection point in the media. I think the coverage of Bobi Wine was something almost unprecedented in terms of
By the local media or international?
No, not only the local, international.
Yes, internationally, definitely.
I was shocked by the level of interest. I mean, Bobi and I had a press conference in Washington, and it was standing room only. And I said to myself afterwards, wow, that's Uganda, and it's standing room only. So
what's it telling you then?
It's telling me, look, I have been saying for a long time, this is Africa's moment.
Yes. The new generation, you mean?
Yes. I think we have a new generation of African leaders.
Yes. Born free, post-independence.
Yes, and who do not want to see the natural resources of the country go to an extremely small elite clique, as you've seen in Uganda. And of course in Uganda you also have the incredible problem of the military, which is they have massive power. They have...
quite frightening when you look at the street, the way they were policing, you know, it was overwhelming force being deployed, it seemed.
with American-made weapons. I mean,
Yes.
shameful. I mean, the United States needs to take a long, hard look.
The U.S. has supported President Museveni
Absolutely.
from the beginning.
Absolutely.
He's been a key ally and a key resource in the Horn.
In the whole war on terror. And you know, as a lawyer, I can tell you, whenever a government declares war on an amorphous issue like terror or drugs, you know that you're in for a tremendous amount of human rights violations, of lack of mission definition, and of danger to the rights of citizens. And the U.S. has viewed Africa in the last post-9/11 period through AFRICOM, through their counterterrorism lens. And it's a tremendous mistake. Until such time as we view Africa as having the greatest resource being its young people, we are going to fail time and time again, and the militarization of Africa is only going to grow groups like Boko Haram and others.
Let me come back to that point about the human capital of Africa. I noticed in the last few weeks quite a change in terms of Trump administration. I think OPIC had put together $60 billion, which, by the way, matched exactly what Xi Jinping was talking about. Do you feel that the dial is being moved in that administration, or this is marginal? I mean,
no. There's a new act that I'm hoping has just been passed called the Build Act, which is got a whole different, more entrepreneurial approach to Africa and its infrastructure. I just spoke at an African Union event in Washington on the new Pan-African Trade Agreement.
yes.
May it live. We're still without Nigeria, unfortunately.
Yes, they were not that keen.
But this is a moment, as I keep saying, where the world is waking up to Africa, and we simply have to find a graceful exit for Museveni.
Is that, do we have to find a graceful exit not only for him but for a number of other leaders?
Biya in
Yes.
Cameroon, who's now fighting again, and I think Biya's case is just pornographic. But we have seen real change. We've seen real change in Ethiopia.
Yes, I'm very excited by him. I thought
Yes.
he's really, he struck me as the most consequential African politician since Mandela in what he was saying, his ability to tap into this new mood you're talking about.
Yes,
But it's probably a big ask there as well.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, when you look at how the Middle East has deteriorated in the last 10 years, almost into a state of near anarchy, you have to say to yourself, you know, Africa to some extent can still be seen as a tinderbox. We don't know where it will go. The influence of China continues to grow. The situation we have in some countries like Zambia is terribly concerning.
You've known Zambia a long time.
Well, and you know, where they've done some really ill-considered private borrowing, which makes it twice as hard to remedy.
And now, just if we don't mind finishing off, just around the Africa story, you told me earlier, Ali Khan, I'm an African, that you'd been here, you know, when you were 16. Just tell me what you're looking to do with the business here on the continent.
Look, we have been here forever, it feels, and we believe that the skill set we've used in Latin America and Asia and in Africa is one that we want to find more local partners, indigenous law firms, firms that we can work with here, where we can team up to defend native entrepreneurs who find themselves in problems with governments, or multinationals who are doing good works but find themselves tainted like our Honduran friends. And we want to build our own African network. A lot of the large firms have these networks, and while that's good if you want to float a stock on the exchange, in terms of trying to defend companies or politically exposed individuals, I think our firm and the network we're starting to develop would be sort of a more appropriate fit for them. So yes, we're in Nairobi exploring opportunities. We've just announced we've been retained in Ghana in a major case there.
Which case is that?
It's the Metzgold case, where the government appears to be acting in a fairly oppressive manner against a truly phenomenal local entrepreneur who's done incredibly great things for the country and for his cohort, for the under 35s. And that's the future of Africa. I mean, in Uganda, 80% of the people are under 35.
It's extraordinary, isn't it?
It is extraordinary.
And but you know, that could be a demographic time bomb as much as it could be a dividend.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's one that the rest of the world resents. China has a terrible problem with demographics. Russia is collapsing into itself, smaller and smaller. I mean, you talk about a time bomb. The Russians will be a virtual non-entity in 60 years.
That's a thought that I'm sure Putin's trying to address. I think he was trying to encourage everyone to have more kids.
Well, and he's using passportization. I mean, he's throwing out Russian passports to everybody who's breathing. And of course, he's been extraordinarily successful, as have the Chinese, in disaggregating the EU.
Yes.
We're witnessing the dissolution of the EU as we know it, Brexit on one hand, Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic on the other, where we have significant departures from rule of law. Not in England yet, but who knows. But we have a whole new, almost more Hobbesian world out there.
It is, actually. Robert, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today, and I really appreciate you finding the time. And we look forward to collaborating with you further.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.